Hey, how's it going? Do you ever find yourself wondering what hook length material to use and what lead arrangement to use in a given situation? I've certainly wondered this in the past. Hopefully I can help demystify this for you a little. Let's get started. First off, we have mono. Okay, so starting with monofilament, or mono as it's more commonly known. You've probably come across this when bulk filling spools. I use monofilament on all of my fishing reels myself. Fishing rigs wise, if you're float fishing, you're going to want something very simple like this. Obviously, got your line straight to the hook. If you're using a pencil float, you wouldn't have the swivel on the end here. You just tie it straight through the float, weight it down with some split shot, and tie straight on with, say, a uni knot. Now, this is a size 8 hook. I use a size 8 for, again, a lot of my fishing there. If you're fishing for roach, you might use something small like a size 12 or 14, or you could go a little bit bigger if you wanted to, if you're using, say, 3 bits of corn. Now for this, you'd use, say, maggots or sweet corn, are the most common basically used that I've seen, and these will catch fish from the smallest rod way out to, your largest carp. If you wanted to use a bottom bait, say a boilie for instance, you tie on your swivel so you can attach to your weight. Use a knotless knot for your hook, and then a simple hair rig. I'll leave a link in the description on how to tie those. As I say, very simple rig, and one of the ones that I've used most commonly. Where would I use this? If I'm fishing somewhere with a light flow, say an inlet into a lake, or fishing in a stream or river, something like this would be perfect. It's nice and soft, it's flexible, it'll go nicely with the current, and your bait will sit up nice and high. You can use this for a pop-up rig. All you need to do there is attach some weight or a piece of putty just here, and your weight will pop up just like this. It does work, I've tried and tested. Okay, next up we have fluorocarbon, stiffer than mono and generally stiffer than coated braid, especially in higher breaking strains. Where would we use fluorocarbon? So if you're fishing somewhere like a gravel pit, a very hard clear bottom, or in a margin that you can see is a nice clear spot, typically I probably wouldn't use it over a very weedy or sort of lumpy bottom. It has a habit of sitting up in a funny way. It's much more likely, particularly in higher breaking strains, to stick up in an unnatural way. It's harder to see underwater than mono, so it's going to be a little bit more difficult for fish to pick up in very clear water. So what are some rigs we could use with fluorocarbon? Well, one of the more famous ones is a stiff hinge rig. Where fluorocarbon is more stiff, it'll help kick your rig away from your weight. This is ideal for if you're finding that you're getting a lot of liners, which is spooking fish away. This is tied with a loop in each end of a boom section. Again, I'll leave a link in the description of how to tie the boom section up. This loop helps the line play a little more naturally underwater, particularly at this top end, where the rig, your hook rig, can move underwater a little more naturally. Obviously you'll have a very short, this is a little tied a little long here, but you put some weight, some putty just around here, around the top end of your swivel, in order to bounce off your pop-up. Alternatively, you could tie up yourself a D-rig. Now, what a D-rig is, and again I'll leave a link in descriptions for these. A D-rig, as the name suggests, rather than having a hair for your bait to attach to, has got a D tied in fluorocarbon in this case, with a rig ring for your bait to attach to, so it can move nicely easily again. This is typically a bottom bait rig. The idea being here is if a fish picks it up and spits it out, it just pops straight back to where it was before, so it resets itself. Again, this is typically a bottom bait rig. Your pop-up rig would be a stiff hinge, for instance. Next up, we have coated braid. Now, in terms of stiffness, it sits in between mono and fluoro. It's somewhat stiffer than mono, a little less stiff than fluoro, used in heavier gauges. So what rigs would we use this for, and where would we use it? Well, if you're wanting something that's a little less likely to coil itself up, like mono, but a little more flexible, so it'll sit over a slightly more uneven bottom, we'd use some coated braid. So, what rigs could we tie with coated braid? Well, we'll start off with the blowback rig. This is quite a well-known rig here. It's tied using a stripped back section of coated braid and a rig ring. The idea here being, if a fish picks this bait up, sucks it in, it can slide up and down on the hook, which means that if it doesn't sit funnily, it won't bunch itself up like so. If it gets blown back out, it should pop itself back and sit nice and flat. Again, this is typically a bottom bait rig here. The slip D rig, much like the blowback rig, has the ability to slide up and down on the hook to reset itself if it gets played with by a fish. Again, you'd have a stripped back section here. I'll leave a link to that in the description. So, what about lead setups? Well, we've got three primary ones to choose from: lead clips, inlines and heli rigs. Let's take a look at those now. So, this is what a typical lead clip looks like. So we've got a tail rubber here, a clip here, and our weight attached onto the end here. So how do these work? So, you attach your lead onto the tail here, like so, and the tail rubber slides onto the end like so. It's good practice to moisten that off so that this tail can slide off easily. Where would we use a lead clip? Well, the idea of a lead clip is that if your line were to snap and the fish were to carry this off with it, if it were to get wedged on something, this tail can slide off and allow it to drop the weight off, which is a very good idea if you're fishing somewhere near snags, for instance, like a big bed of weeds or some reeds, something of that nature. Okay, next up we've got an inline lead. So your main line would come in through the here, your swivel would go into this hole just here, and your rig would come out of the end like so. What's the idea being that if your line does snap off, your line the fish is attached to can just slide out of the end, you can drop the weight and drop the rig a little bit later. Okay, next we've got the helicopter setup. So the idea is you'd have a bead sitting up here, your little rig gets attached to this swivel just here, followed by another bead, and then your weight attached at the end. The idea of this is that your rig can spin like so during casts, helps to stop with tangles. Now, it's important with having your bead set just right so that the end can pop off and the rig can be dropped in case of your line snapping and your fish getting tangled. That will spin off like that. So, where would we use these? Well, both the inline lead and your lead clip are typically used for close in, say margin work, or very short cast just out. Now both of these are designed to drop a lead very easily in case of a break off. Personally, I'm inclined to prefer the inline lead. I find it tangles ever so slightly less. Also a little easier to use with PVA bags than the lead clips. But as I say, that's just personal preference. Both of these will catch. I've caught big fish on both of these setups. They both work very well. For fishing further out, say off to a distant spot or off towards the centre of a lake, I'll be using the helicopter rig because of that aforementioned ability for your rig to spin during the cast, and similarly when it lands, your line can land and sit nice and flat, pop out away from your line, or if you're using a pop-up, it will just sit just up like so from your swivel. Now these you do need to fish a little more slack because otherwise you're going to have your line sitting up like so. So if you're wanting to fish a nice tight line, you're probably better off with something like an inline lead or a lead clip because it's got a better chance of sitting out and away and it's not going to be dangling, sitting up at a funny angle like so. So particularly if you're fishing a pop-up, if your line is sitting up like this, your bait's going to be somewhere way up here. Whereas with one of these, if you have got it tight, well, it's going to sit straight onto the bottom. And finally, what about PVA? Well, we've got two choices here. We've got the PVA mesh and we've got PVA bags. We'll have a quick look at those. So, as with PVA, you've got two choices. You've got PVA mesh or you've got PVA solid bags. So where would we use these and how would we attach them? So for a PVA bag, what you do is you insert your bait into the bottom here. You just drop it straight into the bottom of the bag like that. Your weight would go in the top. You'd fill your bag and tie this up. Obviously you'd want this nice and solidly packed so that it doesn't float away. If you've got too much air in there, it's going to float and then break up and drop your rig along with the contents miles away from each other. Not ideal. So you want that nice and solid if you're going to use those. PVA bags, again, you could use if you're fishing with a bottom bait, You could fish that on a helicopter rig, but you need to make sure that once it's down you slacken this off nice and quickly so that it's laying properly. Also, you're not going to be able to get your weight in there, so you want that as solid as possible. And again, you're going to need a decent sized weight on there. So your PVA mesh, this will work with either an inline lead like so, a heli rig, or a leg clip attached to the end there. And what you do is you tie this up, tie up one end, filled up with say pellets or boilies, and then just hook it straight onto your rig. This will work with any of these three systems, and it will help your rig to sit. Once it lands, the idea being the weight of this will help swing that forward in the water, and then drop a little parcel of pellets or boilies next to it. Now, out of these three systems, close-up work, this is my favourite. It's a distance helicopter rig. These three weights can be used with pop-ups or bottom baits. Any of them will work for those. But obviously pick your rig to what you're doing. Alright, that wraps it up. If you've any questions, leave me a comment below and I'll get back to you when I can. Thanks for watching.